I think the reason why elven armor looks the way that it does is because of what most Aldmer are like, proud and elegant. The Aldmer feel superior to the other races, and you can see this in their armor and in their garments as well. Now, an unlikely place for these observations to be made is in arrows, and specifically arrowheads, since arrowheads actually do have a purpose and reason to have a specific shape in real life. You are probably very familiar with this shape. Or maybe this one. The triangle-shaped arrow has a larger surface and will create a larger wound. The pointy arrow, aka the Bodking, has a smaller surface, which makes it better at penetrating and could have been designed to penetrate mail armor more effectively. So let's dive deeper and look at Skyrim's arrows and see what they say about the races and cultures that made them. Starting off, we have the Iron Arrow. Since we are in Skyrim, this is most likely a Nord-made arrow. Comparing it to real-life arrowheads, it's closest to a Type 1 arrow. Now as you can see, it features a wide tip with barbs coming down from under it. The function of these barbs is that it makes it so that removing the arrowhead creates a larger wound. Iron was commonly used to make arrows historically, but in Skyrim it is far from the strongest metal available. Iron is relatively cheap, and this is why it's probably more commonly used amongst bandits. Having a small hole in the arrow isn't the end of the world, but making these holes any bigger could impact structural integrity. All that being said, this arrow would suffice to kill anything unarmored. I would give this arrow an 8.5 out of 10. It's in the right direction, but it just has some odd features. The steel arrow is a very weird case. I think they upscaled the size of this arrow just for visual purposes, and if they did, it would look like a bodkin. This arrow has an even larger gap, which now actually does impact its structural integrity. The only thing I'll give it is that it looks like one of these modern type arrows. So this arrow is found on Stormcloaks, Imperials, and Guards, and that's why I think it's supposed to be a bodkin. Both sides of the Civil War use chainmail armor, and a bodkin will penetrate mail. That being said, I'd give this arrow a 6 out of 10. Even though it might be intended to be smaller, it isn't, so I can give it points for that. Not much is known about the Dwarven and their creations, but we do have their small arms in the 4th era. The Dwarven Arrow is surprisingly good. It features the barbs I mentioned earlier, but way more prominent and sharp. The arrowhead itself resembles the Type 16 the most. This arrow was no doubt designed to use against man or mer. It's relatively slim, giving it decent penetrative power. The Dwemer metal itself is a mystery. We know it isn't brass, but similar. We also know that this metal or alloy neither dulls nor rusts. This could mean that the Dwemer metal is either a magical alloy or its own metal entirely. And knowing it doesn't rust, it would make it a noble metal like gold or silver. All of these properties make it a perfect arrowhead, and I give it a 10 out of 10. It's very fantasy-like, but given the time the Dwemer were present, it makes sense to have an arrow like this. To wrap things up, we got the Orcish. The Orcish Arrow is the widest arrow in Skyrim, and it's based off the Type 15 arrowhead. This is predominantly a hunting arrowhead, but it could be used for unarmored enemies. On this type of arrowhead, the barbs are most likely not sharpened because it wants to stay in the wound. Instead, it wants to drive itself further in the wound by muscle movement. These arrows are made from orichalcum, which is based off a real-world metal. In our world, orichalcum is composed of copper and zinc and is vaguely mentioned in Greek ancient writings. This arrowhead is basically made to create the largest wound possible. It pronounces the savage nature of the orcs with its design. I'd give the Orc Arrow a 9.5 out of 10, because this arrow would just not be good against any reasonably armored opponents. The orcs themselves wear plate armor, and this arrow would just not penetrate in the slightest. Other than that, it's an amazing arrow and builds on the orc culture. I do eventually want to cover the bolts and arrows from other titles as well, but this is it for now. If you liked it, consider subscribing, and goodbye.